was thinking, for instance, you were wondering why maybe some of the writers withdraw the names to write. I think maybe censorship then in France was a central issue.
In the 50s, yes,
yeah.
but not. Obviously, a naked woman today wouldn't make much censorship.
No, but
right?
censorship, for instance, still exists in France and take many other forms. A friend of mine was invited in an art academy a week ago and find out that she could not access her website because there were different levels of filter within the art academy, and her site was described as obscene and vulgar, and they had to call the mayor of the city in order to withdraw the filter and access. So the system is applied in all the art academy in France, and nobody is aware that this filter exists and that actually the students cannot access information. And so this is just an example of how things could work. And yeah, I mean, I would like also to talk about an example, but maybe later, about an institute in which I took part in Paris that was created by Ponty Sultan, and that has to close down for various reasons. And that was an interdisciplinary project, and with a very interesting format. So I don't know if there are more questions, maybe we can come back to this.
Does any of you want to read the assignment or comment on the issues of censorship?
Well, I mean, I guess what Thomas and I were curious about was also the how can I put it? We wanted to know, prior to being censored, okay,
yeah.
what would actually bring somebody today to withhold their name? If it wasn't a kind of a game, right, a kind of pseudonymic game, what kind of image today and what kind of use of language would lead you to the point that you have to withhold your name? And I remember a lot of the research that we did at the time was around moments, obviously the 50s with Giraudias, but Bernard Noël and who was writing today that was on the edge of acceptability. So there's a Czech writer called Pavel Hak, who has written amazing work, Safari, Sniper, and now a new work called Trans, which is really on the borders, where he, for example, in Safari describes the desperado situation in African countries. People who go out there and who can willfully kill people without it actually being recognized. A kind of another populace, another population within African cities. It's struck true, and it's complex to read, and it's on the borders of being censored, and he had a lot of trouble, if you like, getting it published by Tristram. And it was very interesting to see, to just see how many artists were ready to put themselves in the position of also holding back their name. And all the work I do with Metronome is about trying to encourage artists to get out of their own orthodoxy. We are incredibly protective about what we do, and we keep working towards it and keep working towards it. And in some ways, the only way I can create a communication is if somebody produces something tangential. The moment they step outside what they're really doing, which requires a lot of material and a lot of knowledge, it can be accessed by somebody else in another location who is part of an intelligentsia. But for that, they have to produce something outside of it. And the most extreme form of that is perhaps to do it under another name or under another. If Liam Gillick writes a text under a pseudonym, who's going to know that it's Liam Gillick? It can be incredibly releasing for him if he wants to try it out. It can also be terribly banal. He might not want to do it because, then no one knows it's Liam Gillick, right? So it also questions that kind of position of visibility, and I guess that's what I was more interested in that process prior to the possibility of censorship. Than doing something with pedophilia or the obvious stuff that's going to lead someone to close it down. And the fact is that some of these pieces like Guillaume Leblond, you could never tell that, there's nothing to indicate that it would be censorshipable.
But my question would be, there is way of, Liam Gillick wouldn't write something on pseudonym without having any power to sell his work, or without having power to be acclaimed by another route. So my question is, there is a way of balancing or between survivor knowledge and ethical knowledge. Like also your activity stuff can be questioned in that perspective. I mean, you cannot do
Yeah,
something.
but it's interesting then also because, I mean, part of the workshop, what fascinated me about the discussion today is that we were, 12 people, 15 people in a room, and the backgrounds to what we were, to where we were coming from in order to discuss this issue of knowledge production were not disclosed. And they're very, very different. If you're working formally in an institution where all the research products that you produce are then part of that institution can be claimed by that institution, is very different than if you're, the backgrounds to knowledge production are important. And the assumptions we make in the art world are incredible as to the backgrounds of knowledge production. We don't really know how people survive a lot of the time. And the more you travel, the more those contexts become quite complex as well. Why you're in a certain place, who you're working with, who's paying you, what are you investing in, who are you paying. Those are also parts of the knowledge production issue. So it's easy to assume that if you're part of a platform like this, then you're already you've got that, what did you call it, survivor ethic, as opposed to the other.
Survivor knowledge or ethical knowledge.
Yeah, you've got the survivor knowledge and the ethical knowledge. Yeah. And who puts the ethical knowledge on the table? I mean, in some ways, you said that censorship, continuity, sustainability were the issues that came out for you. For me, the issues that came out were language, speaking, translation, and fiction. And in a way, what pesters me about this is that all three of us, none of us talked up like normally and said, look, this is what I'm really interested in, or I want to tell you a story. Yeah. We were somehow constrained by some sort of format to do, dare I say, with the invitation that brought me to write something that I never would usually write like that, which I was kind of pleased about secretly, or you to read in English, a text, very brilliant text, which made me wonder, did you write it straight in English? Yeah, or did you?
No, I had someone to translate.
Yeah.
But that's the first time I write something, but I wanted to confront this format also because I think that
See?
also it's some way for an artist to try to work with ideas also and some concept that sometimes you use from here to there. And of course, that's not the first time I read some theories, but to try to assemble something. And yeah, you can understand that when you write this, you write a fiction for yourself. And I made no difference between writing this text and making a video piece I will show that I shoot it in Burkina Faso. For me, it's on the same. And this idea also that, yeah, I think that the very topic today is the language. And when I can admit that it was quite confused with this nominalism and realism, but just make it short as nominalism is just taking the idea of the word as and that's what will bring conceptualism also in art. And now we are in a moment where we have to confront these two ways of making words, of seeing words. One of these is the post-conceptual way of producing art, and the other is still the critical realism that we found in documentary. And now what can we see in the field? So many practices that bring them together, and I call them documents of experience. And I extend this notion because it's also a notion that Jean-François Chevrier wrote about, documents of experience, but I think it's much more larger than what he wants to put in it. And when I refer to experience the document, that's also what we do all the time as artists. We're not only producers, we are also receivers. It's like a loop all the time. So we experience all the time new documents, like we experience the documents of Simon and yours today, and maybe others. So that's why I think we have now to reconsider the whole, the idea of knowledge as a practice of the self. That what first you do it for functioning as a human, and you always confront your own perception of things with the reality of the others, even though they are narrative or.
But
let's bounce the question back to Clementine, because our question that we pose with the series of conferences is how is actually knowledge produced, and referring to Badel, who brought censorship in. Did you experience something like self-censorship when preparing the talk because we impose certain framework on you, or you assumed what the expectations were? I kind of disagree with your interpretation of the stories presented, because I did believe there are passionate stories presented.
Yeah, I think they're very passionate. No, I guess it was a mix of the reading the description and not being sure where to place myself and my work in relation to the question, so that I had to remove myself from it in order to talk about processing knowledge production, and put on a kind of hat that I hadn't worn for a while, where I know that, the odd article you write in that format comes back to you again and again and again, and somebody's going to say, oh God, I read that piece you wrote in the Risa Greenberg book on exhibiting blah blah, and you think, oh my God, I wrote that. That was the real kind of way of writing academically that I was taught to do when I did my PhD. So I went back to that, and it was a very strange experience. But I had done an oral version of it, shuffling papers in a very heavy, dynamic way to 15 people 5 days ago, and that was in a way more satisfying than to have to actually go further than I needed to, which was to prepare something for your book. Do you see? So I don't know what I'm really trying to say here, is that I'm impressed that Simon and Vincent and myself, in a way, I'm kind of saying we all made something read, whereas we might have just changed the debate. But I think it's the difficulty of words like knowledge production, For me, they're words that signify the 90s and the kind of discourse industry that you're quite rightly raising, And actually, people haven't been talking very easily. It's always been very formatted,
I mean, that's not what we have to recall about it. I just heard some interesting things today, and I think the major thing is also shifting from this knowledge production to this idea of practice also. That art is first practiced, first of all, before being objects, before being anything, it's practice. It's something that you do, it's an activity. And that's also why I wanted to speak about this project. It's not a project of mine, it's not an artistic project. To make it short, so all the pictures you see there, it's from a collective project called Universal Embassy, which was taking an embassy and housing migrants, and it's still going on now, and we are not part anymore of the project. And for 4 years, as an artist, I've been working like 4 days a week into a project where I just maybe made 10 photographs, and the rest of the time I was busy with juridical information, making social work, you would say. But then it would question the whole way you envision being an artist today, and you would find yourself being some other things, or seen as some other things by the art scene. But so in the same time, you would produce a space that art cannot produce, because it's a living space, because it's at the same time a community space with people from all over the world, and at the same time it's a fiction that addresses the whole community, not only of art, but of the whole society. Because what you produce is like an heterotopy, like Foucault would say, also a sign of counterplace to the closed center where you put migrants before sending back home. So I think this experience has changed so much the way I would now act as an artist also. And
can I, in relation to that, ask a question? If this is not a space, understandably, that art can produce, what space does art produce then? And I'd like to turn that to Simon as well, because we, in preparation for the discussion group this afternoon, we read a text, published a text that's artistic research. And you assign a very privileged position to the field of art within society. and it made me hopeful. But you also say, and you pose it in the form of a question, if I remember well, we need to discuss what kind of public role can artists actually take? And that would be a question that I wonder whether we could just dispute about for a while before soup.
Well, I think this is an example. So, I mean, this is some confluence, I would say, of political agenda, and then this kind of permissiveness that artistic thinking can produce, because I don't think anyone ever said this was an artwork, but I believe that most of the people who started were artists or coming from yeah. And that I find is very interesting, because one of the things that art has done, if we, again, I would agree, expand on Chevallier's notion, is to say we can produce these kind of spaces, and it comes from institutional critique, and it comes from feminist art projects and so on in the 70s, that you can analyze spaces and say, what do spaces produce in terms of discourse and behavior, and how can we create other spaces? So this specific skill of thinking about space, something that architecture used to have, but seems to have lost now, mainly because of commercialization. Perhaps this is one of the things that art can produce. It's just one example.
Yeah, I say maybe art can produce. I say that arts institutions have some very big problems, because this project cannot live. I mean, it's a social project. I mean, but at the same time, it's building representation for those who don't have any. And I think the good question was it this afternoon when we were preparing is how can public institutions address also the practice of artists now, and how, because if they want to survive in some way, they can survive by the market, as you said also, that there are like two ways of operating now. You have like the market way of it, and a lot of museums also, it's not white and black, because of course sometimes you can, but I think the big question is how to address the artist practice that are not made for the institution, and do they have to get into it? Can they support it? Because for this project, I mean, it has only just by friends and finding some money here and there, foundations, sometimes, but never from the art field that we could organize it. So I mean, it's free housing for 40 people.
So now the question comes back to you.
Which of the questions?
The question about the Art Institute, what they should do, what their role could be. This is how we started this afternoon, and we didn't really came out of it. But actually, he's asking you now.
So that's the question, that when it gets really political, when you're really doing politics, but at the same time opening new paths, and I think inventing some kind of new language, addressing some questions with proposals which are, I think, interesting, that then it becomes too political, and that you have to say, yeah, but then if I helped you, I got some problems with the mayor because he's giving money. So it's the whole, I think Simon told also this question of how, well, relation between power and knowledge. So I'm just saying that I don't have any answer. I just say we did this project, and it asked a lot of questions to artists also, to ourselves, first to myself as a practitioner, I would say, and then also to institution, by the way, because it's happening there and not in this institution. So.
But it did happen in an institution in a way, you know, because it's a reconquering of an embassy, and that of course has certain legal, because it doesn't belong, as I understand, right, to the Belgian government. It still belongs to the former state of Somalia.
It belongs to Somalia, but Somalia doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
So we were also kind of aporia also at something of this. But to me, this is the idea of the ready-mix. When I say ready-mix, that's the idea, that instead of having a piece all made, is that you come back into the institution, you just let it in the real world. but you reinvent it from within with a new language. I mean, so you take into account this heritage from Duchamp, so this nominalist heritage to rename something and say that's not that's now it's Fontaine, right? But in the same time you act it in the real situation. So it makes you take nominalism and realism put together and you make your that was the idea.
Well, just sorry.
Just a small question. Why would you need not the help, but the help in quotation, or the support from an institution?
To do this?
From an art institution.
Because you have to make this machine work for you have to pay bills and you are with people who don't have any work, who don't have any paper, and still you have to pay electricity and water and so.
But you did it anyhow.
Yeah, we made parties, we made screenings, we made it by ourselves. But at some point we had some we had a lot of problems also to make it function. So at any time we would get money, it would be very
Yes, but also not having direct support maybe just made you create some other different possibilities and some other survival methods, which made the project itself maybe, I don't know. Maybe it would be something different with the support from an institution.
Yeah, but when I say support, I just speak about money, of course. And so not about,
I wanted to intervene because it would make me very sad if the art institution was seen as a pocket of money.
Of course.
Because I do think an art institution in this context could play an enormous role.
Yeah, me too.
But not necessarily by transfer of funds only. But I think art institutions has very, very privileged access, for example, to political structures. I mean, if I want to speak to a mayor of the city, I can. If I want to go and speak with members of the second chamber of the parliament, I can.
Mm-hmm.
I have privileged space within the media, for example.
No, I agree. We did this also.
And the institution does, I believe a good institution does have an idea about itself, so it provides certain framework within which this work could be distributed in public space. So if you ask about public money transfer only, no.
I was thinking of framing more
Right.
over than.
No, but we made some collaboration
Yeah.
with art institution also in Brussels, like and we organized some trips from there to our house where we made something for them also. So it's not, yeah, at some point you have to reinvent the collaboration, or not the collaboration, but this link sometimes between those kinds of practice which are completely out of the field, and that art institution has many difficulties to deal with. I mean, those pictures these are pictures from a cabaret produced with inhabitants and some people in the project. So there was also, and then there were football team also playing some. So we made a lot of things. Sometimes with art institutions, sometimes with social workers and networks. So it's not.
I would disagree with the notion of this being completely out of the field, as you just suggested. And also, I think once I'm obviously a believer in an art institution, I see potential, obviously. And I think we should refrain from speaking of art institution in general, because there are different modes of working and different possibilities that art institutions generate.
Yeah, just to make it very
So
general.
see, I'm
It's
defending.
not a good way.
It could also be a library or an archive, or, for instance, or an exchange lab. This is already a kind of exchange lab.
No,
but
can I
to figure it out, or.
In this case, what it would mean that you would have 40 people into your back, sleeping in the back there, sleeping and having and making an embassy and claiming for their rights. That's what it means. If you want to, of course, we can also talk to politics. What we addressed through this project is the question of citizenship and borders into a Europe which is being constructed. And what you asked there is, what you propose is also some kind of fiction of a possible citizenship that wouldn't be linked to nation, but a citizenship linked to where you inhabit. Then you would get the rights from there. So the whole project also, we developed reflection with theorists and people from different fields to think about the status of resident. Maybe could be a status for tomorrow. So, but I would mean on a very practical level, that would be that you have 40 people that you have to house for, maybe not for 5 years, but that they come there and you say, yeah, okay, just make your, and from there you begin something, but that are you still in producing art, or can you make it, that's a good question, I think also. How can you deal with it?
There was a reaction there,
Yeah, but when I meant censorship or sustainability and continuity, I mean censorship in a broader sense of, how also politically or economically, and in the case of your project, continuity is an issue, and you need institutional support in order to continue the project, because the energy of free will that people can provide can only be limited in time, of course. And yeah, I would like just to mention this example of the Institut d'études en plastique in Paris that was created by Pontus Hultlen. It was initially to be meant to be a part of the museum, Bobo, and it was censored there. So this research center, educational project, never existed. It took him 15 years to make it happen. And then after 5 years, it was an educational program where we would meet 3 days a week around the table, 20 artists and guests from science, composer, filmmaker, artist, scientist. I mean, it was very impressive, sociologist, impressive program. The government didn't understand what was the purpose of such a place, and after a few years it was again closed down. So, yeah, continuity, what is a possibility today is becoming harder for any kind of other model of thinking or education or art production to survive, and the Bologna process will even make it harder. That's all I have to say.
I think that's pretty much in line with what I just wanted to say, was that I'm very interested in how the projects begin, the knowledge production begins. You want to do something new, you want to work with, I don't know, you want to work with somebody. Or do you want to work with something more abstract, or do you want to work with an institution, or are you invited by an event, or when does something start happening, start working? And I would, of course, institutions are wonderful places. We only dislike the institutions that are bad, as some people say. It's clear. The question is today, what is it, if I want to start something off, if we're in a room, and I mean, the feeling in this room is maybe not like we're all going to produce a new institution or we're going to set something off, but it's fascinating to try and work out how theory can be active, practice is active, I agree with that, but theory also has to be active. So I'm to what degree is it possible for us now to say, with a group of people, we're going to make something happen? I mentioned this earlier when I talked about Genf or Geneva, and the fact that you can ask a group of artists to become the validating factors for a form of research that is produced in an academy. You don't have to allow the outside government bureaucrats to designate what is or what is not successful research with a good outcome. And you said to me, well, you're forming a new academy, yeah? And in a way, yes, I want to see people named. That's what was so depressing about the faculties of knowledge, was that no one said, I want to work with Oscar Tuazon, Christos Papoulias, Nico Dox, and Jan Maat. Boom, that's my faculty. And that the institutions that we're working with are too slow and too cautious to say, oh, professor's gone. No, a lot of art academies that vary fundamentally. I mean, Malmö is a fairly new one, but don't offer fundamental space that the old academies did offer to people to try and do something. So you get more and more people coming in and leaving, coming in and leaving. There's no space to work anymore because it's not even deemed necessary. You have a kind of collective working room with a few plugs, maybe if you're lucky. And I think there are a lot of questions there that can motivate us in the idea of knowledge production to also try and work out how we do it and who the people are that we want to work with. And there's a fairly hesitant, cautious, nearly a kind of Keuschheit, a prudery towards saying, I want to work with this person now. I want to work with that person. Instead, one kind of waits. One waits for the events to tell us who the people are we want to work with. And it's problematic. And I think that, sadly, a lot of the theory that we've been talking through today also prevents you, quite rightly, because of the ramifications of these kinds of constructions, of saying, I want to work with that person, I'm going to bring that person into the room now, they speak another language, it's going to take us 3 hours to get through 20 minutes. Sorry, but this is it. This is an effective, affective, complex form of knowledge production. So I think how we begin our, do we apply for funding and wait? How many artists, young artists do you know who don't produce anymore because they're just waiting for funding? It's wild.
That comes from institutions as well, and I think it's an important corrective to bring it on this level because art institutions don't censor people that run them. There's not such a monster as an art institution. They're monsters people that are running them.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, if I take the situation from France that I know, there have been curators that are now being judged for exhibitions that they made in Bordeaux, for instance. There is a really issue with places that are closed down, or that's in that sense, in a broader sense, so.
That was a question.
Yeah, more comment. I was just thinking, yes, I was thinking about the possibilities the institution has for this project. And in relation to knowledge we're speaking about this afternoon, there's not much spoken or said about not knowing, not learning. So being aware that one doesn't know, which is like the condition for knowledge. In a way, I don't want to sound very old-fashioned, but this is a perfect example of, I don't know how this ambassador work, and I'm going to go in an illegal field, going to make something I don't know yet how it should work. It's really, I don't know. It's not knowledge, it's not knowing. And then then I wonder how far still, and I know there are differences in art institutions and they are made by the people who run them, but how far can an arts institute allow itself that stance of saying, I don't know, and I try out something. And that's, if to say, that's sort of maybe the burlesque of the artist, the pagliaccio, which can allow himself such a thing, and but it is connected to that illegal moment, the illegal of not knowing, or the illegal, in this case, physically illegal, or that these people have no passport. But can you, for example, just to come back to this example, can you really, because that's the risk, take 40 people in the house, like, for example, a church does. A church has, some churches did, some churches from a moral, ethical position, they say, okay, if you come into my house, you come into my church and you live here. So I understand it's very strategic, very clever, probably even more effective to call the mayor. That's the strategy, that's from knowing, that's from the position of knowing to do this. But what do you do from not knowing? That was only my point.
I just want to share that I'm working in the Media Institute.
Speak up so that everybody hears.
Yeah. It was really interesting discussion so far. I just want to share my experience and what I thought about collaborations and how to start, thinking about the value, about how to start. My institution collaborate with scientists and artists and psychologists and dancers and performers. So they come to the playroom. We have a project request because of this room. People can come and play. So we have a hot desk and started to building up their themes or their stories. Sometimes we make in the robot, we sometimes make the books, sometimes we make the charity for the Morocco women who suffer by domestic violence. So many agenda is still there. So from my experience, it's not really about how to start, because everybody has different schedule, everybody has different agenda. I'm applying for my fund and somebody applying for their fund. So when they're coming together in the same desk, okay, how do we practice if we find somewhere we can start with? And how do we make a role? Okay, you doing for this and I'm doing for that. But my battlefield is who does decide which notion is most important and which notion we can skip it. When every agenda comes in the same table, I think that the person who has a bigger voice, or person who has money, or person who knows about the field, always drive the project in a way. So for me, it's ethnical problem, but also sexuality problems, also age problem. It's so many different levels of the battlefield. So while I was fighting for the getting a drive position, then I lost the point. Where did I start with? I think in terms of the finding the point where to start, there can be really various from all different people. But sharing the value to each other, that could be really essential. And I think it's much more about the methodology rather than going into the project in itself. But in a way, how to practice the methodology itself for the various people can be really, really important from the start. Does that make sense?
Does anybody want to comment, or do we take this as a...
Well, I think just to say, I think this is exactly an example of why, if I understand Vienna correctly, he says these are skills of an aptitude of a political kind, you know, because then it's how you use the language when you're in these projects. It can be more or less open, and those who will direct the project is those who will use their language in a kind of political way, you know, it's political skill to get the others to follow you. Yeah, so that's why when we're in project work, we are already in politics, you know, there's no way out.
Political skills, or is it the story of from priest to bishop?
Yeah, it's both.
That's
just the same in a way.
Shall we go for soup? Yes. Thank you for now.